Hey guys, and welcome to Dark Arts Podcast, is where we help you guys navigate the dating madness out there, and we discuss how to avoid manipulation, control, and influence in relationships. We have a special topic today. We're talking about whether is it abuse or is it toxic, and what is the difference between the two? Is toxic always abuse, or is abuse always toxic? Let's have a real conversation about it. And I'm focusing on JT and Lil Uzi, because actually this is not even a video that the video got taken down just a second ago. Literally, I was about to do the video and it just got taken down a second ago. And it was on Lil Uzi and JT. They were dancing and she removes the glasses from his eyes, and everyone was commenting saying he looks scared, he looks like a battered woman, etc., etc. So I want to have a little bit of conversation around what is considered to be abuse and what's considered to be toxic in relationships. And what's really interesting about this also too is that prior to this whole situation, which I was going to play the video of her taking a glass off his eyes, this video here probably shows a little bit. You won't see it clearly, you probably hear more than you actually see. She actually threw a phone at his head top. She threw a phone at his head because she thought that he was being disrespectful by talking and sitting down with Ice Spice. And that's whether that's, you can see it from a different point of view if you want to. But I believe that's toxic in some sense of the word. I wouldn't necessarily say abusive. We're going to break it down what that actually means. When we say toxic, we actually mean that both parties are mutually, exclusive with their particular bad behavior. When we say abusive, it means one person has absolute control and is always seeking to inflict some level of emotional, mental, spiritual, sexual, financial, physical damage to the other person. Let's have a little conversation. But before we do, I'll play a little bit more of the clip and then we'll start this conversation.
Get that. All right. Oh. Do nothing. You're my fucking phone, bitch. Fucking goofy.
So as you hear her speaking, she's obviously like, give me my freaking phone. She dashed the phone at his head top. And they obviously then got to talking after. So, I think first and foremost, anybody throwing a phone, it is abusive, but it doesn't mean the relationship itself is abusive. It is an abusive act to throw your phone or any physical item at somebody physically with intent to hurt. Okay, all right. It is abusive to do so. So if you're one of those people that throw things at people thinking it's cute, man or woman, it is an abusive act to do so. It's physically abusive and would come underneath DV in some sense, right? So be very, very careful that we don't play those games. But is that relationship though abusive, or is it just toxic? We're gonna play a little bit of the intro, and then we'll have a lot more of a conversation in a second or two. Arts. Yeah, talking about the dark arts here, talking to you guys about JT and obviously Lil Uzi Vert. I want to make it very clear, and I want to recite to you guys to make a differentiation between toxic and abusive relationships. Toxic relationships are people being mutually horrible, nasty, vindictive, in some sense abusive to one another. All right. Okay. It's about being horrible, nasty, verbally, sometimes abusive in some sense to each other. Right. And some converge on physical, if you want to call it that, right? To each other. When we're talking about abusive, we mean a relationship with one person who has absolute power, or at least is trying to gain absolute power and control over the other person. And they exercise that through manipulation, emotional fear, and through oftentimes dominance, physical violence, and a physical threat. Okay, so it's very different to it being a toxic relationship where we do tit for tat. We're very petty. We're horrible, we're nasty, we backbite, we say all these kind of things to each other. In a toxic relationship, there's mutuality. Now, it doesn't have to be necessarily equality all the way through, but there's mutuality. In an abusive relationship, there's often one party who has more power in the situation between the two people as well, right? So a toxic dynamic is usually one where somebody feels their life is being leached upon, right? They feel like something's being sucked from them. You're consistently having battles. You're consistently arguing. You have drama every time. You're shouting. You're screaming at each other. You do petty things. You try to get each other back. You try to make the other person jealous. All those kind of games that you play are often toxic aspects of a relationship that a lot of people have gone through in their youth and sometimes in their adulthood too, as well, when they get older, right? So that toxic relationship is so much more different, but you feel drained from a toxic relationship. You feel tired. You feel like you've gone through a few rounds, and it's mutual, right? There is a mutuality to it. And in some aspects, sometimes you can feel stifled, you can feel stunted, you can feel like you're not having no growth, you can feel like you're going around in circles, like you're not actually progressing in life because you consistently do the same thing over and over again, on which you kind of like it at a point in time because it's fun. It's a trauma cycle. It's the peaks and the troughs that come into it that make it so exciting, almost like a roller coaster effect that makes you happy about it because you're used to a dysfunction. That's different to an abusive relationship where you're trying to show that person love. You're trying to show that person care. You're trying to be a generous person. You're trying to be understanding. You're trying to listen. You're trying to be there for them. And all of those things are trumped because the person ends up abusing you and using your good nature against you. They use your goodwill and your good nature and your good character against you and use it in a way that benefits them. They twist, conjure. They are abusive in their verbal language and their physical threats and their emotional and mental tortures. They put you down. They work on your self-esteem. They try to break you down. Those are abusive relationships, and they're very different to a toxic relationship where there is mutuality. In abusive relationships, one person has it. Now, when we want to talk about JT and obviously Lil Uzi, we're not aware because we haven't got the full story. What we saw from JT was abusive, but it doesn't mean that constitutes an abusive relationship because it could be a toxic relationship, right? All abusive relationships have a toxicity in them, but not all toxic relationships are abusive. This was a toxic, could be considered to be an abusive moment. Does not necessarily mean it's an abusive relationship. I'd have to see a bit more, right? But it was definitely an abusive moment. You take your phone and you throw at someone's head, that's no longer toxic. That's now abusive. You're physically assaulting somebody by doing that, right? Regardless of whether you felt like the person was talking to another woman or not, which it was just Ice Spice and they got reassigned seats. So there's a real conversation that has to happen between that, right? In toxic relationships, they bring the worst out of you. And you know it, like we just bring the worst out of each other. Like it's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we bring the worst out of each other. It's Hancock. It is when we get close together, it's a storm. You say some wild stuff, I say some wild stuff. You do wild stuff, I do wild stuff. We do tit for tat. And so we bring the worst out of each other. And so it's completely different to an abusive relationship. And also there's often quick escalation of feelings and hurt that usually happens in toxic relationships. The need to want to be felt, to be heard and to be seen can lead to manipulative tactics that people use to try and get the other person's attention. Again, there's mutuality behind it. JT and Lil Uzi, the real situations, we don't know fully the whole story. What we saw was an abusive moment, though. And that has to be said and has to be kept real. You throwing your phone at somebody's not cute. All right. It's a little bit toxic. Yes, you're going through their phone, but it's abusive when you begin to take your phone and throw it at someone's head. It's dangerous now as well. If they're taking his eye out, would be saying something completely different, right? So yes, being physically assaulting is abusive. But in this case, I would like to say that was an abusive moment. I want to keep it as a toxic relationship at the moment, and we can upgrade it if we see a few more bits and parts of their relationship. Like, share, subscribe, click on the bell button for notification of uploads. Welcome to Dark Arts Podcast, where we help you guys navigate the dating world, and we want to make sure that you guys don't get taken for idiot in this situation.